Elara Vance believed her life had been built on a foundation of quiet certainties: the rising of the sun, the turning of the seasons, the steady rhythmic beat of the small heart that slept in the cot beside her bed. For 3 years, that small heart had been the metronome of her existence. His name was Leo, and he was everything. She had found him swaddled in a coarse blanket on the steps of the village church, a wailing, red-faced infant with lungs that belied his size. He was a secret she had decided to keep, a life she had chosen to claim when no one else would. Her own life had been a series of endings. The death of her parents, the dwindling of her small inheritance, the slow fading of any prospect of a respectable marriage. At 27, she was firmly a spinster, a woman who had traded social standing for a quiet, solitary existence in a small cottage at the edge of the woods. Taking in a foundling had cemented her status as an outcast. The village matrons whispered, their words like the rustle of dry leaves, full of pity and suspicion. But Elara had not cared. In Leo she had found a beginning. She was a miniaturist by trade, her slender fingers capable of capturing a world on a sliver of ivory. It was painstaking work, a craft of patience and precision, and it suited her. Her world had become small, contained within the 4 walls of her cottage and the chubby arms of the boy who called her Mama. She painted commissioned portraits for the gentry in the next town, her work sent by courier, her own presence never required. The anonymity was a comfort. It allowed her to build this fragile life, a bubble of peace that felt as delicate as a soap film. She had asked the boy 100 times where he came from. In the beginning, his silence was that of an infant. As he grew and words began to form on his tongue, the question became a gentle ritual. "Where did you come from, my little star?" she would ask, brushing a lock of dark hair from his brow. He only ever said, "Far away." It was a child's answer, vague and vast, and it was all she had, besides the single object he'd been left with, a small heavy silver locket, tarnished with age, that would not open. She kept it in a locked box, a clue to a mystery she was not sure she ever wanted to solve. The day her world broke began with the sound of horses. Not the slow plod of a farmer's cart, but the percussive, urgent thunder of thoroughbreds driven hard. Elara was in her garden, Leo chasing a butterfly near the rose bushes, when the sound grew from a distant rumble to an overwhelming presence. A carriage, black as polished jet and pulled by 4 matching greys, churned to a halt on the lane before her cottage. The crest on the door was unfamiliar, all sharp lines and predatory birds. It was a thing of impossible grandeur, an alien vessel that had strayed into her small, quiet harbour. The villagers began to gather at a distance, their curiosity a palpable force. Doors opened, faces appeared in windows. A footman in severe livery opened the carriage door. The man who emerged seemed to drain the colour from the summer afternoon. He was tall, dressed in immaculate, sombre black, his shoulders broad enough to block the sun. He moved with a kind of terrible stillness, a rigid control that suggested immense power held in check. He did not look at the gawking villagers. His gaze, dark and penetrating, swept over her small cottage and garden before it settled on her. Elara's heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. She instinctively moved to stand in front of Leo, a useless shield against whatever this was. The man walked towards her, his polished boots making no sound on the soft earth. He stopped a respectful 10 feet away, his expression unreadable, carved from stone. "Miss Vance?" he asked. His voice was deep, resonant, and held no warmth at all. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. She could only nod, her throat suddenly tight and dry. "I am the Duke of Blackwood," he announced, the title landing in the quiet air with the weight of an anvil. "I have been searching for something for a very long time. I have been led to believe you may be able to assist me." Elara stared at him. A duke. Here it made no sense. His face was a mask of aristocratic severity, a strong jaw, a straight nose, a mouth held in a firm, unsmiling line. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his eyes, she could not quite read their colour from this distance, only that they were dark and seemed to absorb the light. There was nothing familiar about him. He was a stranger, an emissary from a world she only painted in miniature. "I do not see how I could, Your Grace," she managed to say, her voice thin. The Duke's gaze shifted, moving past her to the small boy who was now peeking around her skirts, his thumb in his mouth. For the first time, a flicker of something disturbed the man's frozen composure. It was not a smile, not even a softening. It was a sharp intake of breath, a minute flinch, as if he had been struck. His eyes fixed on Leo. 3 years ago, the Duke said, his voice now strained. Lower, my son was taken from his nursery. He would be this child's age. He was lost. I have followed 1,000 false trails, but the last one, a deathbed confession from a former servant, has led me here, to this village, to you. The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from Elara's face, leaving a cold dread in its wake. Son, his son. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of her mind. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. Leo was hers. He was a gift from an anonymous god, not the stolen heir of a duke. That cannot be, she whispered, her hand tightening on Leo's small shoulder. Leo he was abandoned. Was he found with anything? The Duke pressed, taking a step closer. The control was back, but she could see the effort it took. A muscle feathered in his jaw. A piece of jewellery? A locket? Time seemed to slow. The silver locket. The unsolvable mystery. It was not a clue, it was a verdict. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, turning to dust and ruin. She could not speak. She could only stare at the powerful grieving man before her, a man who had come to reclaim a son who did not know him, from a mother the world would never recognise. She led him inside, the villagers' stares feeling like physical blows against her back. The cottage, usually her sanctuary, felt small and fragile with his large frame filling the space. He moved with a careful precision, as if afraid he might break something. Leo clung to her skirts, his wide, curious eyes fixed on the stranger. "The locket," the Duke said, his voice quiet but insistent. Wordlessly, Elara went to the small wooden chest where she kept her few valuables. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it and retrieved the tarnished silver oval. She held it for a moment, its weight familiar in her palm. It was the last link to Leo's past, and she was about to give it to the man who would destroy their future. She turned and held it out to him. He did not take it from her immediately. He simply looked at it, and the mask of ducal authority shattered. In its place was a raw, profound grief that stole her breath. It was a sorrow so deep it seemed to have hollowed him out from the inside, leaving only a shell of rigid discipline. His gaze was fixed on the locket, as if it were a holy relic. "Isabel," he breathed, the name a ghost on the air. His long, elegant fingers, which she now saw, were clenched into a tight fist at his side, slowly uncurled. He took the locket from her, his touch brushing her skin. A strange cold shock passed through her. With a practiced movement she had never discovered, he pressed a tiny, almost invisible catch on the hinge. The locket sprang open. He held it out for her to see. Inside, nestled against worn velvet, was a miniature portrait. It was the face of a woman with laughing eyes and hair the colour of spun gold. The artistry was exquisite, breathtakingly fine. It was the work of a master, far beyond her own humble skill. But it was the other side of the locket that made her gasp. It was empty, save for a single tiny curl of dark hair, identical to the hair on Leo's head. "My wife," the Duke said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She died giving birth to him. I commissioned this a month before. She insisted the other side be left for our son." He looked from the portrait to Leo, who was still hiding behind Ilara. "His name is not Leo, it is Theodore. Theodore Alistair Vance, Viscount St. Giles, my heir." The formal titles were absurd. This was Leo, her Leo, who was afraid of spiders and loved the story of the brave little tailor and slept with a worn stuffed rabbit. He was not a viscount. He was a little boy who needed his mother. The Duke seemed to understand he could not simply take the child. The boy was terrified of him. So began a strange, tense truce. The Duke dismissed his carriage and took rooms at the village inn, a place of simple, rustic discomfort that must have been anathema to him. He came to the cottage every day. He did not demand or command. He watched. He would sit in the small chair by the hearth, perfectly still for hours, his hands resting on his knees. He observed Leo playing with his wooden blocks. He listened as Ilara told the boy stories. He watched her feed him, bathe him, and tuck him into his cot. He said very little, but his presence was a constant heavy weight. Ilara felt like a specimen under glass, her every maternal instinct scrutinized by this silent, grieving man. She learned to see the cracks in his armour. One afternoon, he arrived with a small, exquisitely carved wooden horse. He did not offer it to Leo directly. He simply placed it on the floor near where the boy was playing and retreated to his chair. After a long while, Leo crept towards it, his curiosity overriding his fear. He picked it up, his small fingers tracing the smooth lines of the wood. The Duke watched, and for a fleeting second, Ilara saw a look of such profound, desperate longing on his face that it made her own heart ache. His grief was a physical presence in the room, a suit of invisible armour he wore day and night. The village was a hive of gossip. The Duke's presence had confirmed their wildest suspicions. Ilara was no longer just the peculiar spinster. She was the woman entangled with a Duke, the temporary guardian of his lost heir. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with envy, but most with a pity that was sharper than any scorn. They all knew how this story would end. The great man would take his son, and she would be left with nothing but a handsome reward and an empty cottage. A few days into this strange vigil, a man arrived from London. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies, the Duke's man of affairs. He was a small, precise man with a pinched face and an air of professional condescension. He requested a private word with Ilara. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "His Grace is of course immeasurably grateful for the care you have provided for the young Viscount," he began, his tone suggesting it was a transaction like any other. "He has instructed me to make arrangements for your future. A cottage, far more suitable than this one, will be provided for you in a town of your choosing. A generous annuity will be settled upon you, sufficient to ensure you never want for anything." The cold, clinical nature of the offer was like a slap in the face. He was talking about Leo as if he were a misplaced parcel that she had kindly kept safe. He was trying to buy her off, to erase her from the narrative of her son's life. A cold, hard anger, an emotion she had not felt in years, rose within her. Leo is not a debt to be settled, Mr. Davies, she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. He is a child. He is my son. The solicitor looked taken aback. Miss Vance, with all due respect, he is the Duke of Blackwood's heir. You are no one. You must be realistic. I am his mother, she stated, the words simple and absolute. That is my reality. You may inform His Grace that I am not for sale. Later that day, the Duke came to the cottage. He dismissed Mr. Davies with a curt wave of his hand. The solicitor scurried away, his face a mask of disapproval. The Duke stood before her, his expression unreadable as ever, but she sensed a change in the air between them. The silence in the room stretched thin, like old linen about to tear. Davies overstepped, he said finally. It was not an apology, but it was an admission. He does not understand. He understands finance, Your Grace, Elara replied, her anger still simmering. He does not understand love. The Duke flinched, the word landing like a physical blow. He walked to the window, staring out at the garden where Leo was trying to coax a ladybug onto his finger. For a long time, he was silent. When he spoke again, his back was still to her, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer conceal. When my wife died, he began, the world ended. There was no colour, no sound, no feeling, just a great grey void. I looked at my son, at Theodore, and I did not see a new life. I saw the cost of hers. I saw the reason she was gone. He turned to face her, and she was shocked to see the sheen of tears in his dark eyes. The formidable Duke was gone. In his place was a broken man. I failed him, he confessed, the words raw and torn from him. I was not a father to him. I was a monument to his mother's memory, cold and silent. I left his care to nurses, to staff. I could not bear to look at him. And then he was gone. The nursemaid, a foolish, superstitious girl from the country, became convinced the child was a changeling, a bad omen. During a terrible storm, she fled with him. Her body was found weeks later, washed up on the riverbank miles from here. But the child was gone. We assumed he had been lost to the river as well. His voice broke. For 3 years I have lived in a hell of my own making. I mourned a son I had never allowed myself to know. The guilt, it is a constant companion. Finding him here, with you, seeing him so happy, so loved, do you know what that is like? It is both a miracle and a torment. You have given him the one thing I could not. A mother's love. A home. His confession laid him bare. All his power, his title, his wealth, they meant nothing in the face of this fundamental failure. He was human, flawed, and drowning in a grief so vast it had nearly consumed him. Elara's anger melted away, replaced by a wave of profound, aching pity. She saw not the Duke who had come to take her son, but the father who had lost him long before he was ever stolen. He had handed her the truth of his weakness, his vulnerability. And in that truth she found her strength. The next evening he came to the cottage as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. Leo was asleep in his cot, his small face peaceful in the dim light. The Duke looked exhausted, as if the weight of his confession had finally settled upon him. I will be returning to Blackwood Manor in 2 days' time, Miss Vance, he said, his voice formal once more, but lacking its former coldness. Theodore will come with me. I understand this will be a difficult transition. I want you to know that you will be provided for. You will want for nothing. You may have any role in his life you wish, from a distance. A governess, a companion, the choice will be yours. But he must take his rightful place. He must come home. This was it. The moment she had been dreading. He was being kind, offering her a gilded cage, a place on the periphery of her own son's life. He thought he was being generous. He still did not understand. Elara took a deep breath. She looked at the powerful man before her, and then at the sleeping child who was her entire world. She had been a passive observer of her own life for too long, accepting the hand she was dealt, no more. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it filled the small room with an unshakable certainty. The Duke stared at her, confusion clouding his features. No, you are his father, your grace, she said, her voice clear and steady. You have a right to him. I will not deny that. But I am his mother, not by blood, but by every other measure that matters. I have healed his scrapes, chased away his nightmares, and taught him his first words. This cottage is the only home he has ever known. I am the only parent he has ever known. She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. You speak of taking him to his rightful place. A child's rightful place is not in a grand house full of strangers. It is where he feels safe. It is where he is loved. You cannot simply uproot him like a winter vegetable and expect him to thrive in new soil. You will break his heart. You will break mine. And you will find yourself with a son who fears you. His face hardened. What is it you propose, Miss Vance? That I leave my heir to be raised in a cottage by a miniaturist? The insult was there, the sharp edge of his ducal pride. I propose that you become a father, she countered, her voice ringing with a passion that surprised them both. Not just a claimant, a father. You will not take him from his home. You will become part of it. If you wish to know your son, you must earn his trust. You must earn his love. She laid out her terms, the words coming to her in a rush of desperate, brilliant clarity. You will not take him to Blackwood in 2 days. You will remain here, in the village, for 1 month. Every day you will come here. You will spend time with him. You will read him his stories. You will learn what makes him laugh and what makes him cry. You will let him know you not as a duke, but as a man, as his father. At the end of that month, if he will go with you willingly, if he reaches for your hand instead of mine, then I will step aside. I will let him go. But you will not take him by force. You will win him, or you will lose him all over again. The choice is yours. He was speechless. He stared at her as if he had never truly seen her before. She was not a servant to be paid off or an obstacle to be removed. She was a mother fighting for her child, dictating terms to a duke in her own humble sitting room. She held no legal power, no title, no wealth. Her only leverage was love, and she was wielding it like a sword. He looked over at the cot, at the sleeping boy, the rise and fall of his small chest. He looked at the worn, stuffed rabbit tucked beside him. He looked at the dozens of small, invisible proofs of a life filled with love and care. He looked back at Elara, at the fierce, unyielding light in her eyes. A long, heavy silence descended. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. The tension in his shoulders seemed to dissolve, replaced by a weary resignation that was closer to surrender. Agreed, he said, the word a quiet capitulation. It was the sound of a fortress finally lowering its drawbridge. In that moment the battle was over, and Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had won, not just for herself, but for Leo, and perhaps for the broken man standing before her as well. The month that followed was the strangest of Elara's life. True to his word, the Duke, Alistair, as he insisted she call him in the privacy of the cottage, began the slow, awkward process of becoming a father. The first few days were excruciating. He was stiff, formal, his attempts to play with Leo clumsy and self-conscious. Leo remained wary, preferring the familiar comfort of Ilara's presence. But Alistair was patient. He was a man of immense discipline, and he applied that same focus to this new, terrifying task. He learned the words to Leo's favourite storybook, his deep voice stumbling at first over the simple rhymes. He learned that Leo hated carrots but loved honey cakes. He learned how to push him on the small swing Ilara had hung from an old oak tree, and the first time he coaxed a reel. Genuine laugh from the boy, the look of stunned, radiant joy on Alistair's face made Ilara's breath catch in her throat. She watched them from a distance, her heart a tangle of conflicting emotions. There was a fierce, protective joy in seeing Leo bond with his father. But there was also a sharp, piercing sorrow, the knowledge that every step they took towards each other was a step away from her. She was slowly, deliberately making herself obsolete. Hope, a feeling she had long since packed away, began to stir in her chest like a butterfly waking under glass. It was a fragile, dangerous thing. As the days passed, she saw the changes in Alistair extend beyond his interactions with Leo. The rigid stillness began to melt away. He spoke to her more, asking about her painting, about her life before Leo. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in years. He confessed that Blackwood Manor was not a home, but a mausoleum to his wife's memory, every room preserved exactly as she had left it. He spoke of his loneliness, a profound isolation that his title and wealth could not breach. In turn, she found herself telling him of her own quiet life, her dreams of seeing the sea, her love for the delicate, precise world of miniatures. They were two lonely people, brought together by a child, finding solace in the space between them. The end of the month arrived on a warm, sun-drenched afternoon. Alistair came to the cottage, his expression sombre. Leo, who now greeted him with an enthusiastic cry of "Papa," ran to him and threw his arms around his legs. Alistair lifted him easily, settling him on his hip. The picture they made was so natural, so right, that it was a beautiful, painful thing to behold. "The month is over," Alistair said, his eyes meeting hers over Leo's head. Ilara's heart clenched. This was the moment. She had to be strong. She had made a promise. She knelt before Leo. "Leo, my darling," she began, her voice miraculously steady. "Your papa is going to his home, a very big house far away. He would like you to go with him." Leo looked from her face to Alistair's, his small brow furrowed in confusion. He tightened his grip on Alistair's shirt. "You come too, Mama?" The question she had both hoped for and dreaded. She looked at Alistair, her eyes pleading. Alistair set Leo down gently on the floor. He then did something she never expected. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His were warm and strong. "Ilara," he said, his voice quiet and raw with emotion, "I came here to reclaim my son, but I have found so much more. You were right. A home isn't a place. It's a feeling. It's safety. It's love. For 3 years you have been his home, and this past month you have started to become mine." He paused, his dark eyes searching hers. "I do not want to take your son from you. I want you to come with us. I want you to help me turn a mausoleum back into a home. I want you to paint by the sea facing windows and fill the halls with the scent of honey cakes. I want Leo to have both his parents. Marry me, Ilara, not as a reward, or a duty. Marry me and let us build a life together." All 3 of us, tears she had held back for a month, streamed down her face. It was an impossible, ridiculous, wonderful proposition. a duke proposing to a village spinster. But looking into his eyes, she saw no trace of the cold, remote man who had arrived a month ago. She saw Alistair, a father, a man who had found his way back from the grey void of his grief. She looked at Leo, who had taken one of her hands and one of Alistair's and was trying to pull them together. Her answer was not a word, but a simple, heartfelt nod. 1 year later, Elara stood on a balcony overlooking the sea. The salt spray misted her face, and the cry of the gulls was a cheerful sound. Blackwood Manor was behind her, its windows thrown open to the light and air. The oppressive silence she had first encountered there was gone, replaced by the sound of running footsteps and childish laughter. She was no longer Miss Vance, the lonely miniaturist. She was Elara, Duchess of Blackwood. She wore the title as she wore her fine dresses, with a sense of slight disbelief but growing comfort. In a sunlit studio that Alistair had built for her, she still painted her miniatures. But now her favourite subject was a dark-haired boy with his father's eyes. A boy who was growing taller and stronger every day. She heard footsteps and turned. Alistair came to stand beside her, his arm sliding around her waist. He was a different man. The grief was still a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. Laughter came easily to him now, and the love in his eyes when he looked at her or their son was a constant, warming light. "He's asking for you," Alistair said, his voice a low murmur against her ear. "He has a frog in a jar and insists on showing it to his mother before it can be released back into the garden." Elara laughed, a sound that felt as natural as breathing. She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as Leo, now Theodore to the rest of the world but always Leo to her, ran across the vast lawn below, his jar held aloft like a trophy. She had once believed her world was small, confined to a tiny cottage and the love of one small boy. She had been wrong. She had learned that a home was not measured by its walls, but by the size of the love it contained. And here, with the sea before her and her family around her, her world felt boundless.